Before we dive into some specific questions, I'll throw you a little curveball in maybe not a curveball, but if we didn't have this whole time to talk and you're like, oh, I only have one thing I can give this audience, what advice would you give them?
Ooh, that's good because right now I'm obsessed with this idea of your blind spot is your breakthrough. Um,
Oh yeah, I love that. I love that in your book. I saw that in the book, The Blind Spot. Yeah,
yeah,
man,
your
I love
blind spot
that.
is your breakthrough. Um, you just talked about it and I just talked about it, right? What are those blind spots that are going to unlock the next version of you? And so for me, it was being, in fact, my struggle in kind of contrasting to yours, I was extremely systematic. I was an engineer. I learned in project management. I was systematic. So I had systems down, but
Yeah.
systems at some point don't scale and they don't provide the vision, the inspiration, the market. Like you probably, you starting your business, you had vision on spades. You had all these attributes that enabled you to kind of birth something. I had systematic and I was missing sort of that next thing, which this entrepreneurial journey kind of forced me to do. Like, what value creation am I going to do in the world, as opposed to how am I going to just sort of manage all of these things that other people have figured out and that I just need to execute on. So we kind of had opposite journeys in some ways. But those are all, if I could give the audience one thing, it's get super, super curious about your blind spots. And the only way to do that is to get feedback because we cannot see it. I'm teaching my 16-year-old to drive right now. He never checks his blind spots. It's terrifying. I have a brand new car. I mean, it's even easy now. There's a big flashing light on the mirror when there's a car in your blind spot, and he still doesn't check his blind spots.
Yeah.
And as leaders, we're often sort of changing lanes or trying to navigate. We have all these witnesses around us. It's hard to get good feedback as a leader, and you have to double down on that openness. But that's where you will find your blind spot, and that is your key. Like, you need to dive into it with curiosity because that's where you'll unlock your next level of greatness.
Very interesting. So I want to go back. This is not a marriage podcast, but I want to go back to your husband for a moment. So usually opposites attract. So you're extremely systematic, detail oriented, you didn't say this, but want to do it once and do it right and not go back to it again. And you would rather be right than be on time. And so, okay.
Yeah.
So you're like, wow, how did you know me? So is your husband the opposite? Is he more visionary, idea oriented, even though he's still corporate?
He's way more relational. So
Okay,
I would be more
relational. Yeah.
transactional. I've had to learn to be much more relational.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was much more, I'm much more transactional. He's much more creative. He doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. Like, he thinks he makes sense, but he doesn't. And eventually he makes sense, but not in the moment. And he's Swiss, so he is always on time.
Oh, there we go.
Which was
or early.
Yes, which was a huge shock for us early in our marriage because I was never on time.
So the reason I bring this up for the audience, I want to remind you that building on what you're saying, Marisa, is that you're talking about feedback, and we have to get feedback from people that we may not be comfortable with. And their initial comments, either their tone of voice or the words they use, we may not like, we may not agree with, but if we're willing to receive it and then think about it, I think I saw this in your book too. I'm not, this isn't just me. I think I saw this as I was perusing the book, that may lead us to have an epiphany, have a light bulb go on in an area that was a blind spot, but we needed them to kind of hit us on the head with a 2x4, a verbal one. I still love that phrase, although I did talk with a young man whose dad hit him with a 2x4.
Oh,
and it really slows me down every time, but I still like it verbally as a metaphor. That if we can receive that and kind of process it, that, okay, because a lot of times that wrong judgment they're making on us is based on a partial truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, because I think this is huge for people.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I'm in the business of trying to sometimes be an intermediary. So with almost all my coaching programs, I do what I call stakeholder interviews, where I basically interview people who are critical to their success. And I go in and I kind of investigate and I ask about, you know, what are the things they could do more differently? What are the things that would improve the collaboration? I ask things like, what's something they do that really doesn't bring the best out of you? I ask all these questions. I'm like the little investigator, and I come back with really, really, really detailed feedback to help people just really get a sense. And I do multiple people, and there's themes. There's themes everywhere. There's themes with people that you have really great relationships with, in fact, what's surprising when I first started doing this work was that the themes are very similar, whether you have an amazing relationship or a terrible relationship. The difference is the intensity of the irritation on the other person. The people that love you, they still see these things. It's not that you're not doing them with these people. You're still doing them. They're just sort of like, it's endearing to them. It just doesn't bug them that much. It's still probably suboptimal, but it doesn't bug them that much. Whereas that same action with people where there's a challenged relationship will have an incredible intensity. And so there'll be varying intensities, but it's kind of undeniable that there's these things that they're doing that are not optimizing their team. And as a leader, your individual performance is no longer really relevant. You're a rounding error, right? You are responsible for the collective performance of hundreds of people, potentially, right? And so it's like you could sit there and you'd be like, this is my style. You can get kind of stubborn about it. Like, this is just who I am. And it's like, yeah, well, it's upsetting 99 other people. So you can stay there if you'd like, but if you'd like to grow or scale or have more ease or influence or alignment, you may want to experiment with these things. But when I bring this feedback to my clients, there's like the shift between how dare you, like there's, how dare you, it's like this really, and we move through that together to thank you so much. It goes from like, how dare you to thank you, right?
Yeah.
And it's normal. The how dare you is normal. And the reason why it's normal is because what we're hearing is out of line with what our intention was, right? I talk a lot about intention. Our intention is they're not referring to your intention. They know you have positive intention. They're referring to the impact you're having on them. So when you hear the feedback, you're like, how dare them? I worked so hard for them. I set up I did this, and you're all in your intention, but your intention's invisible to them. So they're blind to your intention, you're blind to your impact. And unless we have these dialogues, we miss out on some breakthroughs for each other.
But do you ever have people that are upset also because they got caught?
Ooh, that's interesting. I don't know that they admit it.
Yeah.
I try very hard. Like I'm like a scientist by training. And so one of the things I try to do.
You and Jim Collins.
One of the things I like to do is just look at these feedback. All the feedback has data. And I want to look at it on a scatter plot. I want to be like, this person says this person, and I want to figure out where that trend line is. And I try to encourage my clients to not emotionally, like, people often sort feedback by emotional intensity. And so we're adding some kind of other axes around how much does that annoy me, as opposed to, is it frequent and is it consistent and might there be something to explore here? So I'm rarely trying to help people understand why it happened or whether it's right or not or all those kinds of things. I'm just trying to be like, here's the scatter plot, here's the trend line, here are some experimentations we probably want to run to see if we can shift it. And I'm trying to get the client to a quick win very, very quickly, because as soon as they start to realize that these very small calibrations, I mean, what's funny about like these situations is it sounds really big, and then there's these very small things that a leader can do that will transform the impact. And so I remember, I guess I'll go back to when I first had a coach. I remember thinking that I needed a lobotomy to address all the feedback I was hearing. Like, I was like, they don't like anything about me. Like, it's an emotional experience. And then I remember working with my coach, realizing it's actually these really small tweaks that can make a big difference.
Yeah. So give me, by the way, I loved your thing of saying you're a rounding error. It reminds me of, I love the series, A Person of Interest on Amazon. And there's a bad coder. If you're shaking your head, maybe you watched it. I love the series, where she says, people are just bad code. So that's what reminded me, that comment
Yeah.
about her comment about bad code. But you talk about these little things. If I was in the audience right now, I'd be wondering, so give me some stories, some examples, whatever, of what are those little things? Is
Yeah.
it as simple as tone of voice, or is it simple? I mean, I could go through another list, but I want to hear from you of what are some examples that might make that light bulb go on for people. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I do that.
Yeah. So often it is, so I'll give you just a personal example. So in that example with my 360-degree feedback, I found out that people hated my meetings, which seems like a bad thing. Given that as a leader, your communication, like, your people are supposed to, meetings are fairly important.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, why? Like, that was shocking. Like, why? So my intention with those meetings, the way I would run those meetings at this point, I have a big workforce, a lot of projects. So I'm obsessed about efficiency. So my intention going into that is like, let's get in there. Let's be really specific about what needs to get done. Let's check in. Let's make sure nobody has any problems, and let's get them out of there as soon as possible. Right. So it would be kind of this, I was just in this mode, this energy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I found out that people didn't sleep Sunday night because of my Monday morning meeting, hated these meetings, felt that they were called out all the time, like all kinds of bad. And it was terrifying. And I paralyzing, in fact. And I was like, I don't even understand how much I have to change. Like, do we have to do like a whole offsite at a spa together? Like, I don't know what we have to do to just reset this environment. And what my coach encouraged me to do is think of the smallest thing you can do to just change the dynamic of that meeting. And I came up with two things. The first was just totally change my energy. Like, I had to get rid of that crazy driver, like time scarcity kind of energy. Like, I came in that I had to rush, so that I had to change my energy. I was like, let's pretend that this is like a celebration meeting. Like, we just finished a project and we're getting it together to celebrate. So I had to kind of trick my mind that we were going to go in and just see energetically, what did it bring if I just assumed everything was good instead of assumed everything was bad, right? Which was what I was doing. So that was one shift. And the other thing is I just did this very quick, like, who wants to add to the agenda? Like, what do you guys want to talk about today? Like, blah, 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 blah. And over a series, it wasn't immediate, over a series of meetings, it really shifted beautifully from me doing 80% of the talking like a dictator to me facilitating, the agenda and having them doing 80% of it. And it was amazing. It was amazing. Ownership came up, accountability came up, cross synergies came up, like all kinds of magic started to happen that had very little to do with me. Now, what I realized in hindsight is that meeting went from being for me to being for the 9 people that the meeting should have been for all the time. So that's a little small shift. Now, it feels big and it might sound big, but it's very small, in terms of behaviors. I mean, we're all smart people. We can figure out how to do something a little bit differently.
Fabulous. Good stuff.